ஓகே. அது யூடியூப் லைவ் ஆயிருச்சு.
ஓகே. அருட்பெரும் ஜோதி, அருட்பெரும் ஜோதி, தனிப்பெரும் கருணை, அருட்பெரும் ஜோதி. Dear brothers and sisters, today we have Dr. Thill Raghu from US going to give a discourse on divine grace and the immortal body. Will we welcome Dr. Raghu? Vanakkam, Vandanam. Good morning, Dr. Raghu. Yeah.
Yes.
Our doctor has been associated with us for like several years. I know he has been working on a lot of articles and research oriented papers or details about Valal Birman, and he's an ardent devotee of Valal Birman as well. So his writings are excellent. Everybody should go and visit his blog and see and read his writings. They are wonderful on different perspectives of Birman. He is a I think he has a doctorate in philosophy, so he will be able to compare multiple things in the world and give the summary of how Birman's teachings are. So that is those are good articles to read actually. So with that introduction and with a welcome message, we welcome our brother Dr. Thill Raghu to this program and give his discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna, and thank you to all members of the Valala Universal Mission. I'm very happy to be here. I have, of course, followed on the webpage the various, talks and topics and so forth, even if I've not been able to actually join because I'm 3 hours behind here in the West Coast. So it's kind of early for me when you start your programs there. But I've been following as much as I can your activities on your webpage. And I applaud the work you're doing, including, of course, Gopi and Prasanna, the work that's being done to promote Valalar's teachings. And I hope and sincerely wish that it continues to be done as successfully as it has been done so far. Today is Easter Sunday, and it's for Christians, it's symbolic of the conquest of Jesus over death. He's supposed to have he's supposed to have appeared or manifested 3 days after the burial, after the crucifixion. So it's kind of, I didn't really plan to give this talk on divine grace and the immortal body, which is all about the conquest of death on the path of Sudasan Margam, as envisioned or described by Valalar. I didn't really plan that it should be on an Easter Sunday, but it just worked itself out that way. I made a couple of posts on my blog a few days ago, and then I thought that if there was an opportunity, I could give a talk. And then Prasanna mentioned the possibility of doing it this Sunday, and it was pretty quick notice. But I thought, okay, let's do it this Sunday, and so here we are. Again, I'm speaking in English. I've usually given my talks in English, although I know Tamil, but I'm not, I can't claim to be very fluent speaker in Tamil. I read Tamil, but I don't write in Tamil. And of course, we are in the United States. And in the English-speaking world, including, of course, India, various parts of India where they don't understand Tamil, and of course here in the United States, Canada, England, and so forth, there is a need to introduce people to the teachings of Valalar in English. So it's in that spirit that I continue to offer these talks in English. But I am, of course, familiar with Tamil and the original writings of Vallala, and I will, of course, refer to them and speak Tamil when reading those passages from Vallala. So anyway, thank you, and let me get started with the talk proper. Um, the divine grace and the immortal body. Um, the first point is that for experience, knowledge, action, and enjoyment, which are all important for the self expression and development of an individual soul or spirit, anma, a body is necessary. Bhudagarya Degam, as Vallala puts it, a physical body. So without a physical body in some form or the other, and we know there are 7 types of bodies corresponding to the 7 forms of life with various variations that Vallala talks about in the Jivakarnya Workam and also in the Agava. All of them, of course, are living beings with particular types of bodies. So that type of physical body is essential for an individual soul to have experience, knowledge, action, and enjoyment. Otherwise, it will be covered in ignorance. Mudam is the word Vallala uses. So anyway, a physical body is necessary for a soul or spirit to experience, know, act, and enjoy in any physical world. I'll come to the relevant passages from Vallala's writings shortly. Now, physical bodies, as we know, are perishable. All of the physical bodies we see around us are born, they grow, develop, and then they begin to decay and they end. Which is what we call death of the body. But the soul or anma, the I in the body, which knows, which undergoes experiences, which acts, decides, enjoys, suffers, and so forth, that is consciousness, that soul or spirit is consciousness and survives the death of the physical body. After the death of its present physical body, a soul will be in a state of ignorance, mudam, and bondage or bandham, subject to the compulsions of its accumulated memories, desires, fears, attachments, and of course, karma. So, therefore, it will seek another physical body to get out of that state of ignorance or mudam and to have more experience, knowledge, activity, and enjoyment in any physical world which supports life. This is not the only physical world which supports life, as we know from the writings of Vallala. There are the realms of the Devas, and then there's the realm of the Naraga or hell dwellers, and so forth. And of course, even in this world, there are non-human realms of existence, plants and animals and so forth. But the essential rationale of rebirth or reincarnation in a new body, in any world of living beings, is this, that the soul seeks, after the death of its present body, it seeks another physical body to come out of that state of ignorance and to have more experience, knowledge, activity, and enjoyment. And this cycle of rebirth, reincarnation is endless. As Vallala puts it in one of his verses in the Agava, Yellayil Pirappenum Irunkadal. So Yellayil means limitless. It's an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And it will remain endless as long as we, the individual souls or spirits, do not seek liberation from that cycle. Mukti is the liberation from that cycle of rebirth. As Vallalar puts it, now I'm going to read the passage from Jivagaranya Workam in support of what I've just said and attributed to Vallalar. ஆன்மாக்களெல்லாம் இயற்கை உண்மை ஏகதேசங்களாகவும், partial manifestations, இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருள் அறிவுக்கறிவாய் விளங்குவதற்கு ஒற்றுமை உரிமை இடங்களாயும் இருக்கின்றன என்றும், அந்த ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகி அதிகரிப்பதற்கு பூதகாரிய தேகங்களே, that is bodies resulting from and constituted by a combination of physical elements or constituents. That's what Vallalar means by பூதகாரிய தேகம். அந்த ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகி அதிகரிப்பதற்கு பூதகாரிய தேகங்களே உரிமையாக இருக்கின்றன என்றும், அந்த தேகங்களில் ஆன்மாக்கள் சீவர்களாகி அதிகரியாவிடில் ஆன்ம விளக்கம், which is the light of the soul, மறைப்படும் என்றும், அதனால் அருள் விளக்கம், which is the light of அருள் or divine compassion force or grace force, வெளிப்படாதென்றும், அப்போது மூடம் உண்டாகும் என்றும், அதுவே ஆன்மாக்களுக்கு பந்தமாகும் என்றும், அது பற்றி அவசியம் பூதகாரிய தேகம் வேண்டும் என்றும், and so forth. So the point that the பூதகாரிய தேகங்கள் are very important for the souls to develop, to grow out of the state of ignorance. And every time the body dies, the body that the soul has taken dies, there's a kind of eclipse of its knowledge. And in order to get out of that eclipse of the knowledge, of its knowledge, it has to take another body and then continue to grow and develop. In the Jivagarinya Workam part 3, Vallalar says, தனக்கென்று சுதந்திரமாக ஒரு வீடு கட்டி கொண்டால் முன்போல் குடிக்கூலி கொடுத்து குடிப்போவதை தவறுவான் என்றும் அறிவது போல, இந்த தேகத்தில் ஆகார கூலி கொடுத்து குடியிருக்கு வந்த ஜீவன் இதற்கு முன்னும் வேறொரு தேகத்தில் அந்த கூலி கொடுத்து சீவித்திருந்தான் என்றும், தேகமில்லாமல் சீவித்திருக்க மாட்டான் என்றும், இந்த தேகத்திலும் கலகம் நேரிட்டால் இன்னும் வேறொரு தேகத்தில் குடிப்போவான் என்றும், தனக்கென்று சுதந்திரமாக நித்தியமாகிய அருட்டேகத்தை பெற்று கொண்டால் பின்பு வேறொரு தேகத்தில் குறிப்போக மாட்டான் என்றும் அறிய வேண்டும். So this is again affirming reincarnation. இந்த தேகத்தில் ஆகார கூலி கொடுத்து குடியிருக்க வந்த சீவன் இதற்கு முன்னும் வேறொரு தேகத்தில் அந்த கூலி கொடுத்து சீவித்திருந்தான் என்றும், and then of course தேகமில்லாமல் சீவித்திருக்க மாட்டான் என்றும், which is a point I already made. The soul, in order to live, have experiences, knowledge and so forth and grow, needs a body. And இந்த தேகத்திலும் கலகம் நேரிட்டால் இன்னும் வேறொரு தேகத்தில் குடிப்போவான் என்றும், that affirms the survival of the soul after the death of the present body, but also reincarnation will take another body. And then comes this important point for the topic of the stock, divine grace and the immortal body. Vallalar says, தனக்கென்று சுதந்திரமாக நித்தியமாகிய அருத்தேகத்தை பெற்று கொண்டால் பின்பு வேறொரு தேகத்தில் குறிப்போக மாட்டான் என்றும் அறிய வேண்டும். And he draws an analogy with the person who is moving from one rental to another, a rental house, who finally builds his own house, his or her own house, and therefore no longer moves from house to house, rental house to house, right? He started with the தனக்கென்று சுதந்திரமாக ஒரு வீடு கட்டி கொண்டால் முன்போல் குடிக்கூலி கொடுத்து குடிப்போவதை தவறுவான் என்றும் அறிவது போல. So that's the comparison or analogy, and so the conclusion of the passage is தனக்கென்று சுதந்திரமாக நித்தியமாகிய அருட்டேகத்தை பெற்றுக்கொண்டால் பின்பு வேறொரு தேகத்தில் குடிப்போக மாட்டான் என்றும் அறிய வேண்டும். So essentially Vallalar is saying that in just the way a person who has moved from one rental house to another rental house or apartment or whatever stops doing it when they build a house for themselves, or when they own their own house, in just the same way, the individual soul, which migrates from body to body, that is the process of reincarnation, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, it will stop doing so when it obtains the totally free Nityamagya Arutegam, that is the immortal body, which Valala refers to here as Arutegam. And he does so because it is really formed and granted by Aru. That's why he calls it Arutegam. In the Agaval, he will also use the expression Arul Vadivu. Arul Vadivondre Arya Vadivu Arul Tara Muyalagendra Aruya Sivame. See, that's the line in the Agaval. So I want to also here again remind you that in previous talks, I've always talked about the importance of comparing, right? Whatever we attribute to Valalar, it needs to be really supported by the Jivalarnya Workam essay, which is incomplete. We have only about 3 parts with various repetitions, originally supposed to have 7 parts. But whatever we find in Jivalarnya Workam, we need to check with the Vinnapangal. And of course, as I have said many times, the final court of judgment is the Agaval. If it is not confirmed by the Agaval, then there's a question mark over whatever we are attributing. And then if it is actually contradicting the Agaval, then it's not something that is Valalar's teaching. So using that principle, that's why I quoted the Agaval lines, and that is in agreement with Valalar's description of this immortal body as Arutdegam. But anyway, the point he is making is that the individual soul will stop taking rebirth in these perishable physical bodies when it obtains the immortal body, which is Arutdegam, or granted by the power of Arul, or the supreme compassion force of Arutpuranjoli. So how do we then, so what happens then if the soul seeks liberation or mukti from the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation? So, we're going back to the point that this cycle is endless, as long as the soul does not seek liberation. And once it starts seeking liberation, then what happens? It can attain mukti, or the liberation from this cycle of rebirth or reincarnation in new perishable physical bodies, only by achieving freedom from the power of memories, desires, fears, attachments, and its karma. And it cannot achieve this freedom from the factors that contribute to its cycle of rebirth or reincarnation. And the point of that cycle of rebirth, reincarnation, is not punishment. It's not about punishment. Oh, I did something bad, and so I'm pushed into another birth to punish me for the sins I've done in the past life, and so on. Or nor is it just kind of a simple-minded reward process. Oh, I did some good, so I come back and then enjoy the, I'm rewarded for the good that I've done. That's a kind of a childish conception of reincarnation, which many people have. Even in India, every time, okay, you've done something wrong, so you're going to be reborn and you're going to suffer for it. Or you did something good, so in your next life, you're going to have some benefits and so forth. Now, there is certainly karma, as we know from the writings of Valalar, but reincarnation is not simply about karma. Reincarnation occurs because of the other two malam, anavam, which is egoism, and maya, or attachment to a material body. See, those are also playing a role in this process of reincarnation. But arulinil teruttum arutpuranjodi, teruttal, the whole process of development, right? In the Agaval, there are verses where Vallalar celebrates the fact that Arutpuranjodi is bringing about the development of all these souls. Arulinil teruttal, teruttal is development. So this process of rebirth ultimately is a process of development of the soul. The soul is going towards what? Towards mukti and siddhi. All the various experiences, enjoyments, sufferings, various things it knows, and so on and so forth, various actions. It's all a process of growth towards mukti and, of course, siddhi from Valalar's perspective. But this mukti, once you reach a point where you begin to grow tired, and it's something that starts from within your subconscious, as it were. You get tired of, the worldly enjoyments, and you get tired of the sufferings, disease, misfortune, this, that, and the other. And that starts growing slowly within you and pushes you towards and actually strengthens this urge to mukti or liberation from this cycle of rebirth. But we cannot achieve that mukti without divine grace force or divine compassion force. I call it grace force, compassion force, because it's actually Sakti, as we know in Sudarshan Margam. Arul is not just a divine benevolence, it is actually a force, a Sakti, and Arut Sakti, the grace force, is really behind everything we see, including the immortal body. It's the absolute force of power underlying all objects, entities, events, processes, and phenomena. So if we begin to sense this urge towards mukti, to get out of the cycle of rebirth, and it's not always a conscious thing. Not everything is conscious. As they said, things will come up from the subconscious. You may begin to sense a kind of detachment, a need to detach yourself from all these worldly affairs and so forth and so on. There may be increased devotion, interest in reading spiritual literature, Anmiga, Nurgal, and so forth. In various ways, it will grow, but of course, it needs to be nourished when it starts showing, when the symptoms appear of the need to get mukti and get out of this Elayil Pirappinu Mirungara, right? As Agaval verse, Elayil Pirappinu Mirungaral Karati in Allalai Nikyarut Purinjodi, the boundless light of divine compassion has enabled me to cross the vast dark ocean of samsara, of endless waves of birth and death, and abolished my suffering. Allalai Nikyarut Purinjodi. So that's the aspiration, to get out of this Elayil Pirappinu Mirungara with the grace of Arutpuranjodi. That is the essential thing that will lift us, as Vallalar himself testifies happened in his case. It is Arutpuranjodi who will enable us to cross this Elayil Pirappinu Mirungara, the vast dark ocean of endless waves of birth and death, and the suffering that goes with it. So Vallalar has emphasized that the reception of this divine grace force or divine compassion force, Arul Sakti, is really determined by development of universal compassion in the individual soul, as you all know. It's a sense of unity with other living beings, and then it's constant contemplation on Arutpuranjodi and Arutpuranjodi's, Yerke Valakam, Yerke Unmai, Yerke Inbam, and so forth. We'll get to some of the details, further on in this talk. But what is remarkable is that Vallalar affirms, and this is why Siddha Sanmargam has some unique features. Of course, we all know that we should know that it's not a religion, Samayam or Madam. It is basically a spiritual philosophy and spiritual path and practice, whose main goal is mukti, leading to siddhi. So what is remarkable is Vallalar not only affirms that the liberation, affirms that Vallalar affirms that the liberation or mukti of the individual soul from the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation. This mukti is, Vallalar of course says it is possible, it can be done, but he goes a step further. And in the whole of Indian tradition, to my knowledge, and if I'm wrong, someone can point this out, there has been no approach like this which sees mukti as a means to siddhi. And of course, by siddhi, Vallalar means perenba peruvarvu, maranamilla perenba peruvarvu, an immortal life of bliss constituted by an immortal body. And that conception, you see, the mukti is also there in the Buddhist tradition, Jain traditions, in the form of nirvana or liberation from reincarnation, rebirth. But that mukti, that state of mukti is only a means to attaining siddhi. That is very unique to Vallalar, very unique to the spiritual philosophy and spiritual path we call Sukha Sanmarga. And of course, this all happens in accordance with the design of our Purusha. And Vallalar underlines that only its Arul, or supreme grace force or compassion force, can bring about that siddhi, Perenba Peruvaru, Maranamala Perenba Peruvaru. So essentially, in philosophy, we focus on what are called arguments, meaning reasoning, logical reasoning, and so forth, trying to show that a particular conclusion is reasonable to believe. And so Vallalar's argument, he doesn't come out and say, here's my logical argument, but you can find the logical argument in his writings. Even in, his early writing, Manumure Kandavasagam, there are arguments to show that in respect of right to life, other living beings have the same status as a human being, and so on, and the debates between King Manu and his ministers and others, there are many interesting arguments there to put in English and to show that those are philosophical arguments. Okay, so his central argument, using argument in that sense, is that since a body is essential for self-expression and functioning of a soul or individual consciousness, that is to bring out its vilakam and its own iyarkai unmai, the body is necessary. So if you accept that, then it follows that a body is also going to be necessary for a liberated soul. So a soul that is liberated in the sense of becoming free from the mummalam, right? Anavam, maya, and karma, egotism or egoism, attachment to matter and karma, and of course, liberation from desires and all that. What is it going to do? It's still true that the soul needs a body to function. Now, if this muktiya in the soul, the liberated soul, gets a body that's perishable, then what will it do after the death of that body? Right? So it is muktiya in the liberated soul in a present physical body. What is going to happen to it once the physical body dies? If you say it's going to move to another physical body, as all souls need bodies, so this soul also must need a body. But if that's another physical body, then we're talking about reincarnation again, are we not? So if Mr. X is liberated in the sense in which we use liberation or mukti, then when the present body of Mr. X dies, Mr. or Mix or Miss or whatever, what happens to that liberated soul? Given Balalar's point that or truth that a body is necessary for any soul to express itself and so on, to perform actions in a world, this liberated soul then also needs a body. But if that body is a physical body, perishable body, the point actually would be that if it's the perishable body, if that body also dies, then what happens? The liberated soul moves to another physical body and so on, which means it's back again in the process of reincarnation. And that's really not liberation. If that soul still has to keep taking physical bodies that keep dying, right? So logically, then that liberation must move the soul towards an immortal body. That seems to be the logical, the natural conclusion, the natural end to that process of liberation or mukti would be that it finds a body that no longer dies. Otherwise, it will continue the rebirth, and it's not really mukti or liberation. So even the logic of mukti or liberation implies that to consummate or perfect that mukti or freedom from the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation, it must obtain an immortal body, a body that doesn't die. So the argument here is essentially that if you accept that there is such a thing called mukti, and we do accept that in Sudarshan-margam, then that mukti must naturally result or lead to what Wallalar calls siddhi, which is the attainment of the immortal body and the Maranamilla Perenba Peruvarvu. That Maranamilla Perenba Peruvarvu is anchored in a body. That is why Wallalar talks about the Arutdegam. I referred to that earlier, Arutdegam, Maruvadivu, and so on. All this is just Wallalar's reiteration of this really crucial insight, truth that a body is necessary for any Anma, liberated or not. And if it is liberated, it will have to find a body that's immortal, that no longer dies. Otherwise, it's caught in the same cycle of rebirth. So if you say that the liberated soul is reborn in a Deva body, right, the body of the gods, then even the body of the gods, however long they may last, do have an end. So what happens when that god body dies? They gain another body and so forth. Then we're back again to the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation. So the mukti, the condition of mukti, if you examine what it is, especially in Sudarshan-margam, or even in other traditions, you are pushed to the conclusion that for the mukti to be perfected, it must result in siddhi. It must go towards siddhi. And that's what Wallalar says in the Agavo, right? Mukti என்பது சித்தி அடைவதற்கு means. That is the means. புறையுறு சித்தியின் பொருட்டே முத்தியை அடைவதென்று அருளிய அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி. It's a revelation from Arutperenjodi that what we talk about as mukti, just glorified in the Indian tradition as the complete end of all spiritual achievement, is actually a means to siddhi, or adapthood, you can say, which is the possession, which is the attainment of the Maranamilla Perenba Peruvarvu, which is, again, the basis of it is an immortal body, Arutdegam, Arutwadivu. These are all descriptions of an immortal body. So the siddhi is the consummation of the process of liberation of the individual soul from the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation. So again, we should really remember that verse from the Agavo, Purayura Siddhiin Purutte Muttiye Arivadandroliya Aruppurinjodi. And that there is, Wallalar hasn't come out and said, well, okay, here is my philosophical argument and so on, but he's left the indications to form a very convincing argument that if you accept the ideal of mukti, you cannot avoid the conclusion that mukti is going to be consummated or perfected in siddhi. That mukti or liberation from spiritual ignorance and the bonds of worldly desires, etc., turns out to be a means to the attainment of siddhi or adulthood. It's not just an opinion. Okay, it's not just an opinion, or it's not just we're saying, oh, that's one possibility. No. To be perfected, this condition of mukti has to result in siddhi. Otherwise, it will keep continuing with the process of rebirth. You can say it's higher bodies, deva bodies, or whatever, but those bodies also have an end. They also die. And then, so from going from one deva body to another deva body is still rebirth. So, and those bodies also face, as we know from the first Vinapam of Siddhasanmargam, those bodies face all kinds of sufferings, right? They may be higher bodies, but they face their own forms of sufferings. So, as Vallara puts it in the first Vinapam, to just support this point about how even these higher bodies undergo sufferings. And so if you say that the mukti are in the Anma, the liberated soul, is going to go to these higher bodies, then that's another cycle of rebirth, which is not really liberation or mukti. In the first Suttasanmarga Satya Siruvinapam, Valalar talks about the sufferings undergone in various bodies, right? And plant form, insect, animal, and so on. And then he talks about the gods or other forms of life, gods and Naragar and so forth. Paisasar, Buddha, Rakadar, Asura, Sura, Mudalayaga, Paranda, Paranda. அலைப்படுதல் அகப்படுதல் அகங்கரித்தல் அதிகரித்தல் மறந்து நிற்றல் நினைந்து நிற்றல் மயக்குறுதல் திகைப்புறுதல் போரிடுதல் கொலைப்படுதல் முதலிய பல்வேறு அவத்தைகளால் இறந்து அத்தேவ யோனி வர்க்கங்கள் எல்லாம் சென்று உழன்று அலைப்படைந்தோம். Essentially what Valala is saying here is that these birds in these non-human forms, non-human bodies, and he mentions a category, different kinds of non-human beings. They call them supernatural beings or whatever, but they're all subject to their own, subject still to nature, although it's a different order of nature. Paisasa, Buddha, Rakadar, Asura, and so on. Rakadar means Rakshasa or a monstrous being. Buddha is an elemental being or a ghost-like entity. Paisasar it's a ghoul, like a devil. Asura are anti-divine beings. Asura, of course, are the gods. They all undergo these other kinds of sufferings. அலைப்படுதல் அகப்படுதல் அகங்கரித்தல் அதிகரித்தல் மறந்து நிற்றல் நினைந்து நிற்றல் மயக்குறுதல் திகைப்புறுதல் போருதல் கொலைப்படுதல். So he mentions murder, war, murder, forgetfulness, Mayakurudal in this case would be subject to delusion, Tigaypurudal subject to confusion, and so on. So they are also subject to sufferings, these higher bodies, or even, well, I mean, if you say the mukti arinda, the person who's liberated is born in a higher deva body, that will still undergo sufferings. And so it's not really mukti in a complete sense. So for mukti to be completed and consummated, it has to result in siddhi. Siddhi is the natural completion of mukti. So that's why these verses in Vallala's great work, Agavon, are important. I've already mentioned Purayurasitti in Purutte Mukti Arevadan Jodi. The Mukti is attained in order to achieve Siddhi, which is the attainment of the great deathless life of bliss. But Valala also says, Mukti என்பது நிலை முன்னூறு சாதனம் அத்தகவென்ற in Arupparinjodi. Arupparinjodi revealed to him that mukti is simply a means and actually preparatory practice to attain siddhi. Mukti itself is like a sadhana or spiritual practice to attain nilai, which in this case, of course, means deva nilai, or a state of union with the divine being. And then siddhi என்பது நிலை சேர்ந்த அனுபவம் அத்திரல் என்றவன் அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி. Siddhi is the attainment of the divine consciousness, divine bliss. And so mukti becomes a means to siddhi. But what that really means, since siddhi, the essential aspect of siddhi is the possession of an immortal body, what it means is that for mukti to be completed, it must end in siddhi and the attainment of an immortal body, after which, of course, there is no rebirth because you have the immortal body. So you're not going to be moving to any other body in just the way a person who has built a house for himself or herself is no longer going to be running around renting one house or apartment after another, right? So siddhi or adepthood is the ultimate goal of Valalar's yoga or the path of Siddhis and Marga. As Valalar has reiterated in the Arupparinjodi Agaval, mukti or liberation from the bondage or bandhan of the three courts, mummalam, right? Egoism, anavam, materiality or attachment to matter, which is maya. Remember, maya in Siddhis and Margam is used in the same sense in which it's used in Saiva Siddhanta. It's not used in the sense of Vedanta. In Vedanta, maya means delusion, illusion, and so forth. But not in Saiva Siddhanta and in Sudasamagga. Maya simply means matter. And attachment to matter is a malam or impurity that puts the soul in a state of bondage. And then, of course, there is kanmam or karma. Actions and the law that makes us undergo the results of the actions we have performed. That is what karma is all about. So mukti is actually liberation from these three malams of anavam, maya, and karma. And it's a means to attaining siddhi or adepthood. And as I have repeated myself, the siddhi is in Sudasamargam conceived as attaining the Maranamilla Perenva Peruvarva. It's a great life of bliss without death and disease, age, and so forth, suffering, fear. And so it is the supreme goal in Sudasamargam, for which mukti is a means. In many traditions in India, mukti is regarded as an end in itself. And I hope I've given you a glimpse or two of Valalar's reasoning, which leads us to conclude that no, it can't be the end. Mukti cannot be the end. It has to be siddhi, the way it's conceived by Valalar, with an immortal body. Otherwise, the mukti that is tied to a perishable body will simply continue with reincarnation, and that's not really mukti. So, the liberated soul cannot be, since all souls need bodies, it cannot be anchored in another perishable body. Because if it is so, then it will be subject again to rebirth or reincarnation, regardless of what kind of body it is, even if it is the body of Deva and so forth. So the siddhi, then, so our attention now should turn to what the siddhi is, because that's what has as its foundation this immortal body, right? Now, what type of body is this? Maranamilla Vegam, what type of body is it? Now, we know from the expressions Arul Vadivam in the Agaval, and of course in the Jivakarinam itself, Valalar has used the expression Arup Vegam. So we know it is formed by Aru, the supreme grace force or compassion force of Arupuranjodi. It is not formed by any tricks of yoga, mantra, tantra, and all that kind of stuff, whatever benefits they may have. It can only be formed, constituted by Aru. So that's something we really have to keep in mind. And the second point is it is not a material or physical body, such as the human body, because it's not composed of the impure and impermanent constituents, asutta, prakriti, anukul, and so forth. These are constituents subject to deficiency, decay, and dissolution, decomposition. That's what we see happening to physical bodies all around us. And they happen also to the bodies of the devas, even if those bodies last vastly longer than human bodies. Okay, so this Arupvegam or Arubadivam is not a physical body constituted of the impure and impermanent constituents. And it's also indicated in that very famous song by Vallala, Katrale, Puviyale, Kaganamadhanale, Kanalale, Punalale, Kadiradiale, Kutrale, Piniale, Kolekariviale, Kolale, Pira Yetrum Kurinsayalgalale, Vetrale, Yenyandrum, Ayade, Vilangum, Meyalika Vendum Endrain, Virendalithan Enake, Yetrale, Ivana Nenayadir Ulagir, Yende Aruparanjodi, Revane Sarvire. It's a wonderful song, the meaning of which is, Valalar says, he asked Aruparanjodi that he should obtain a body that is immune to the effects of wind, the earth, space, fire, water, cosmic rays, Kadiradiale, including the rays of the sun and the stars, Kutrale, death, Pini, disease, Quale Caribiale, instruments of murder, Kolale, poison, planetary effects, and so forth, Pirayatrum, Kodinselgalale, other evil deeds or cruel deeds, Vetrale, Enyandru, Mariade, Valangam. This body should not be harmed by any of these things and should be eternal, right? That was his prayer. And he says, Virendalitan Yanake, Aruparanjodi Raven, the Supreme Omnilight, granted his wish for this kind of a body. But interestingly, he says, Yetrale even in Ninayadi Ulagi. I don't know if others who have talked about this song address these words. See, all of these songs, and there are songs that are not from Vallala, I don't want to get into that right now, but there are songs whose beauty is such that you can immediately feel, yes, this is from Vallala. And this song is certainly, at least to me, feels like that. But when we take these songs, we really have to pay attention to every word, because Vallala does not use words in vain. He uses words to convey something that he wants to convey. So we have to pay careful attention to the words. I mean, many poets do that, but sometimes poets choose things for ornamental value. But Vallala doesn't do that, in my opinion. So, Etrale Ivananayadi Ulagi, what does that mean? Etru is actually evidence, proof by evidence. Ivu, of course, is something that's lacking in it, right? So he says, Etrale Ivananayadi Ulagi. So he says, don't reject this because you're not able to see proof in the normal way in which we prove things. Just because that's not immediately available to you of the existence of this kind of a body, don't reject it. And then what does he say? He doesn't say, come and obey what I'm saying, accept me blindly. He doesn't say that. He says, Yende Aruparanjodi Revne Sarvire, which means basically take refuge in Aruparanjodi, or the Supreme Being, And the implication is then Aruparanjori will illuminate your understanding about these matters, depending, of course, on your sincerity and depth of devotion and so forth. So that's an important, line there. Yetrale Yuvananayadiya. Don't reject this simply because you can't immediately see proof or evidence for this, right? Of course, if it is a body that is immune to all of these natural forces, it's highly unlikely that it's a physical body, right? He says, Aryade Vilangum Mayalika Vendum and rain. It's a kind of body that is not affected by wind, fire, etc., etc. And so it's a very different kind of body from the physical body. I believe that this song, in fact, suggests that. And this body is Muttiral Vadivu, in the expression of the Agavo, Muttiral Vadivu. And we also seen the Vinnapangal references to this. This body is trinite. The word trinite, Trinite, means three elements, three components related to each other. It's kind of like three in one, that sort of thing. And it is trinite, and it is constituted by the transformation of our present trinite complex. See, we don't realize that our present condition is actually in a trinite kind of a complex of a body, right? We have three bodies. We're only aware of a physical body, which is the waking state. I'm talking, and if you're listening, you're in that state right now in the physical body. But there is also the dream state, right? Where we are not aware of the physical body, but there's some other kind of body there, which is experiencing and acting and so forth in the dream state. And that's called Sukma Sariram, Sukshma Sarira in Sanskrit. And that's the subtle body. And then we have a state where we don't have any dreams. It's the dreamless deep sleep state of consciousness. But we're still there. Otherwise, when we wake up, we won't be able to recollect that, I had a deep sleep without dreams and that kind of thing. We won't be able to recollect it if we didn't exist in that state in some form. And that is regarded as the Karana Sarira, or causal body. It's called Karana Sariram because it is the basis of the formation of the physical body and the subtle body, or the Sukma Sariram. So right now, although we are predominantly focused and probably only aware mostly of our physical body, we already have a subtle body and a causal body. And this Arupdegam actually has three bodies. Three component bodies. And it makes sense to think that they are transformations or transfigurations of our present three bodies, right? Or we can say they kind of correspond. The three bodies that form the Arupdegam or Arupbadi kind of correspond to the three lower bodies that we right now are enmeshed in or trapped in. So there is that superior body corresponding to our physical body, Suddhadegam. There is that Pranavadegam, which is the higher form of our present Sukmadegam, which is used in the dream state. And that Jnanadegam corresponds to our present causal body, or Karana Sariram. Of course, we don't need to get into too much of the metaphysics of these things, but just keep in mind that this immortal body, and Valala also refers to it as Muttiral Vadivam, Muttiral. It could mean the three kinds of siddhis, or it could also refer to these three bodies, Suddhadegam, Pranavadegam, and Jnanadegam. So essentially, the immortal body in Suddha Samadhi, Valalar's vision, and attainment or achievement, has these three component bodies. In just the way our present condition has its three component bodies of Sthula Sariram, physical body, Sukuma Sariram, and Karana Sariram, or causal body. In just that way, this immortal body has three component bodies. As Valala puts it in Samarasu Sutta Sanmarga Satya Peruvinapam, எக்காலத்தும் நாசமடையாத சுத்த தேகம் பிரணவ தேகம் ஞான தேகம் என்னும் சாகா கலானுபவ தேகங்களும். So remember, plural, தேகங்கள், but they are component bodies of that immortal state of embodiment. Then தன் சுதந்திரத்தால் தத்துவங்கள் எல்லாவற்றையும் நடத்துகின்ற தனிப்பெரு வல்லபம் கடவுள் ஒருவரே என்றும் அறிகின்ற உண்மை ஞானமும் கர்ம சித்தி யோக சித்தி ஞான சித்தி முதலிய எல்லா சித்திகளும் பெறுகின்ற அருட்பேரும் பெற்று வாழ்கின்ற பேரின்பத் பெருவாழ்வில் என்னை அறிவிப்பதற்கு திருவுள்ளம் கொண்டு அருட்பெருஞ்சோதியராகி and so forth. But the key reference here is to Sutta Degam, Pranava Degam, and Jnana Degam. He talks about it, he refers to them as Saga Kalanubhava Degam Go. This is what the state of immortality is all about in Suddhasa Marga, these three bodies. So we drop our present physical body, the Sukkuma Sariram or subtle body, and the Karana Sariram or causal body, and we reach this state where we have Ekalatham Nasamrayada, Sutta Degam, Pranava Degam, Jnana Degam. I already mentioned the verses from the Agaval, Muttiral Vadivam Munniyangaidura, Mattiral Enakkarul Arupparunjodi. Muttiral Vadivam, I think here refers to these three bodies and their own capacities. Arul Vadivadive, Taniya Vadivu, Arupparumelugan Varuya. So, it's Ariya Tani Vadivu, Arul Degam. So, it's again a formation of immortality. But the other point that comes that emerges here is that Vallala's vision of this trinite or threefold body, the immortal body, is very different from and actually goes way beyond the idea of an immortal human body. So, in the Tamil Siddha tradition, and I intend to, explore the contrast between Vallala's philosophy and the philosophy of the Tamil Siddhas, especially on the body. It is not, Vallala does not subscribe to Kaya Siddhi. Nowhere does he talk about Kaya Siddhi. He talks about Siddha Degam, but not Kaya Siddhi, or the indefinite prolongation of the physical body, this physical body that we all have, by which I'm talking and by means of which you're listening. Kaya Siddhi, done by the Tamil Siddhargal, who had their own, forms of greatness in their poetry and approach and so forth, is also a downside. Let me just add here that a lot of the Siddha poetry is what is called misogynist, that is anti-women. Okay, just talks in some very disparaging terms about women. Now, see if you can find anything like that in the great works of Vallala. I mean, in the Agaval, Aripparanjodi is praised as Thai or mother, right? And we know that Vallala wanted spiritual education to be open to both men and women. And the ideal of Anmaneya Urumaippadu excludes very strongly any kind of discrimination based on sex or gender, or any kind of discrimination against women and so forth. So that's a very important contrast between Vallala and many of the Tamil Siddhas, at least as we know about them from their poetry, surviving poetry. But Vallala certainly does not promote this approach that's called Kaya Siddhi, taking different herbs and other chemical combinations to make the body allegedly immortal, right? That is not there in Vallala. Although what you have in Vallala is care of the body, but the care of the body, taking care of the body, is because the body is a means to mukti. Without the body, we cannot attain mukti. And if we cannot attain mukti, we cannot attain siddhi. So the body is essential. I've already, that was the first point I made. The body is essential for the soul to develop and grow to a state of spiritual wisdom, liberation, and so forth. And even in that state of liberation or mukti, there is a higher state of siddhi where it still needs a body, but that becomes an immortal body and so forth, right? So body, the importance of the body certainly is there in Sudarshan Margam, the care of the body, and the Siddhas certainly emphasize that. But there's no kaya, the ideal of kaya siddhi, making this physical body immortal. I don't see any evidence in Balala of promoting or subscribing to that notion, because in Sudarshan Margam, it's about substituting this physical body with that Suddha Dega, or pure body made of pure elements, and so forth. Sutta, Buddha-Karyaniko, Prakrutyaniko, and so on and so forth. Pure elements, pure constituents. And this body has these gross and impure elements which are responsible for various deficiencies, the decay, aging, disease, and then finally death. So we're not doing that in Sudarshan Margam, although we take care of the body. And as you know, Valala talks about substituting or replacing this body made of impure elements with a pure body made of pure elements, Suttamaya, pure matter, and so forth. Tol, Narambu, Enbu, Dasai, Rattam, Sutta, whatever it is, Mudavya, Asutta Buddha Karyangalam, Avatrin Karanangalagia, Asutta Prakruti, Anukumagi, Degate Matri, changed it, substitute, replacement. மாற்று இவ்வளவு என்று அறியப்படாத உயர்ந்த பொன்னாகிய சுத்த பூதகாரிய சுத்த தேகத்தை. So that is the ideal. It's not to be, not to try and prolong the alleged indefinite extension of the life of the physical body. That's not what we're doing in Sudarshan Margam. And the passage that I read essentially means that the physical body made of impure substances is going to be given up for the incomparably greater goal of a pure body made of pure substances and elements, pure matter. In Saiva Siddhanta, there's the conception of Sutta Maya, or pure matter. It's a very interesting notion. And the Sutta Degam, this pure body, is made of that pure matter. By contrast with the impure matter, or asuttamaya, which produces decay and decomposition, etc., right? And so this Sutta Degam is immune to pain, aging, disease, infirmity, or incapacity and death. It is invincible in the face of any assault by any of these natural forces, elements, beings, etc., in the universe. And is also not bound by the laws of nature. I will get to some specific observations of Valalar in a few minutes. But the Tamil Siddha and also the Chinese Taoists also had some practices of trying to make the body, physical body, immortal. I think that we have to conclude that that's just a fiction. It's not achievable. And even, just think about this other point too. I mean, what is the purpose of indefinitely extending a body if it's going to be subject to pain, disease, and other kinds of things? Just because the physical body is made to live doesn't mean much if it's going to, hey, imagine somebody suffering from cancer for 200 years, where do you want that? Or if it's made to live for 300 years full of diseases, headaches, toothaches, this, that, and the other. It makes no sense. But the more fundamental point is we have no basis in science for thinking that it can be made immortal. I mean, we can extend the longevity, keep it in health, maybe even reverse or stop the acceleration of aging. but there's really no basis to think that this physical body can be made immortal. And Ramana Maharshi, many of you might know, 1879 to 1950, great Vedantic sage who lived in Tiruvannamalai. Somebody talked about Kaya Siddhi. He responded, he said, the best judgment on all that talk is the fact that the physical bodies of all those people who lecture on Kaya Siddhi eventually met with the same fate as that of the rest of humanity, right? Where are all of them? I mean, if there were, and there was a Chinese poet, Tao Chien, in the 4th century, who asked the question in one of his poems. He asked, if the Taoist immortals were once alive, where are they today? They have in Taoism the idea of 8 Taoist immortals. Okay. Well, where are they? If they were once alive and then they became immortal by the practice, by Taoist practices of immortalizing the physical body, where are they? And we can ask the same question of the Siddhas. Where are the Siddhas who wrote eloquent poetry about Kaya Siddhi? None of them are around. And we know that in the 20th century, some of the Siddhas or practitioners of Siddha, the Siddha approach, I don't mean just Siddha medicine, but the Siddha approach, they all died. We know that. So there is, and we know that the close disciples of Vallala also died, right? There's nobody alive. I mean, Swami Saravananda, great exponent, devotee of Vallala, he passed on. So there is no evidence to believe that the physical body can be made immortal. But that does not undermine, and it possibly cannot undermine the Suddha Sanmargam goal of achieving an immortal body, because that immortal body, Suddha Degam, Pranava Degam, Jnana Degam, are not physical bodies. And I'll get you some details that make it very obvious, right? And then finally, we can also recall a line from Omar Khayyam, the famous Persian poet. His great work, Rubaiyat, has these lines, their words to scorn are scattered and their mouths are stopped with dust. That's what happens to everyone. I mean, even I'm talking right now, one day this mouth will stop and it will be stopped with dust. That's the fate of the physical body. And that is because of its very nature, underlying nature, asutta prakriti anukul and so forth. But then the soul is immortal. So you and I are already souls that have survived the death of our previous bodies and will survive the death of this body. Anma, I mean, we have the sense of I, and Vallala talks about this in the Jivagaranya Worka. The I is the person who enjoys, right? Who is it that says, I had a headache yesterday, oh, I enjoyed a good meal a day before yesterday, and so forth? Who's the enjoyer, right? I. That I, we have no idea how any particular part of the brain can generate it. There are some correlations between some skills, motor skills, verbal, talking and so forth, and parts of the brain. Even there are some problems because there have been cases of people who have had those parts of the brain damaged, especially the parts dealing with language. There was a child born with a hole in that area, but she still learned language and was very fluent in language. And it's one of the puzzles of modern, neurophysiology or brain science. So there are some puzzling cases like that. But even if you accept that we can correlate our moving our hands or legs with certain parts of the brain and so forth, and speech in general with certain parts of the brain, there is no clue. We don't have a clue where this I sense, non, where does that come from? Okay, and that is really the very basis of our existence, the non, the I sense. And since we cannot correlate it with anything in the brain or anything in the body, it is reasonable to think that it cannot be reduced to the body or the brain. which means it will survive the death of the body or the brain, and that's really the soul. The soul is that which says, I enjoyed, I suffered, I did this, I did that, I remember this, I know that. That is the soul, right? It's not some ghostly thing that you possess. You are that. You are that person that says, I know this, I did that, I suffered, I enjoyed, etc., etc. So that soul is immortal. It survives the body, death of the body, but it needs a body. So, if we realize that deeply, then we're not going to be afraid of death. But then if we also realize deeply that we need a body and that it cannot be these perishable bodies, because we are then caught in the cycle of rebirth or reincarnation with all the suffering, with all its allel or suffering, the dark ocean of rebirth with the endless waves of birth and death and the attendant suffering. If we want to get out of that, we have to aspire for this immortal body. But we have to be very, very clear. We're not aspiring for this physical body to continue. That is not what it's all about. And so whatever Vallala is talking about has to be understood very clearly in terms of what he himself has said. So the Suddha Degam is not the physical body. The physical body is made of impure atoms and constituents. And they're impure because they're subject to decay, dissolution, and decomposition, which manifests as various ways: disease, aging, and finally death. That is not the body he is talking about as part of this state of Siddhi or Perunda, Marmala Perunda Peruvarvu. And the body he's talking about is the Suddha Degam, Pranav Degam, and Jnana Degam. Uyarnda Ponagya Sutta Buddha Karya Sutta Degam, highest gold of a pure body formed by pure elements. And that is the Suddha Degam. Excuse me. Punvadivaga Tondrudal Matirame Andri Agayam Por Parisika Parada Sutta Buddha Karana Pranav Degam. The pure subtle body of pure energy, which appears in golden form and is otherwise intangible. It's like touching space. That is the Pranavdegam. And Tondra Pardalum Mandri Agayam Pol Vilangagendra Jnanadegam, the body of intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom, which has no apparent form at all and is like space. So the immortal body actually has these three components: the Sutta Degam, Pranav Degam, and the Jnana Degam. The pure body formed of pure elements, the pure subtle body of pure energy, which appears in golden form and is otherwise intangible like space, and then the Jnana Degam, the body of intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom, which has no apparent form and is like space. So we have to really have a clear understanding. We shouldn't be confused in our minds about what this trinite immortal body, I say trinite because it has those three component bodies, right? What it is, based on what Vallala has actually written and said in the great works of Jivakarnya Workam, Vinapangal, and the Agaval. Vallala in the Jivakarnya Workam, the incomplete 1867, at least incomplete to us, gives specific descriptions of, or we can say descriptions of this immortal body. Okay, and it applies to all three component bodies: Sutta Degam, Pranav Degam, and Jnana Degam. For some, it may be quite obvious that it doesn't. These descriptions apply to Jnana Degam and Pranav Degam, but we have to bear in mind it also applies to what he calls Suddha Degam, or the pure body made of pure matter, pure constituents. First point he makes is immunity to the effects of physical elements and forces. That means it cannot be affected, crushed, damaged, or shattered by solid objects. It cannot be struck by physical objects, such as stones, even if they are thrown at it. Then I will be quoting some sentences from the second part of Jivakanya Workam, the இரண்டாம் பிரிவு, second part. உள்ளே மண்ணினது திண்மையால் தரிக்கப்படார்கள் புறத்தே மண்கல் முதலியவற்றால் எரியினும் அவை அவர் வடிவில் தாக்குவனவல்ல. Of course, he is talking about those who have attained this பேரன்ப சித்தி பெருவாழ்வு, but many of these things pertain to the immortal body that they have, the immortal bodies that they have. It cannot be affected by water. It cannot sink in water. உள்ளே நீரினது தன்மையால் குளிரப்படாமல் புறத்தே நீரில் அழுத்தினும் அவர் வடிவம் அழுந்தாது. It cannot be affected by fire or heat. It cannot be burned or scarred by fire or heat. உள்ளே நெருப்பினது வெண்மையால் சுடப்படார்கள் புறத்தே நெருப்பிற் சுடினும் அவர் தேகத்தில் சூடும் வடுவும் தோன்றுவனவல்ல. It cannot be affected by air or wind. It cannot be dislodged or moved by air or wind. உள்ளே காற்றினது ஊக்கத்தால் அசைக்கப்படார்கள் புறத்தே காற்று அவர் வடிவை பரிசித்தசைக்க மாட்டாது. It cannot be affected or limited by space. It can move equally on the ground and in the sky or space without any support. உள்ளே ஆகாயத்தினது கலப்பினால் அந்தரிக்கப்படார்கள் புறத்தே ஆகாயம் அவர் தேகத்தை அந்தரிக்க மாட்டாது. ஆதாரத்திலன்றி நிராதாரத்திலும் அவர் தேகம் உலாவும். It can move equally on the ground and in the sky or space without any support. Now, these 5 points pertaining to the immunity of the Saga Degam, the immortal body, to the elements, the 5 elements, tells us something really important, which I have not seen pointed out by usual commentators on these matters. This body can function in terrestrial realm. Otherwise, Valala wouldn't be talking about how it won't be affected by fire, or even if you immerse it in water, it's not affected. உள்ளே நீரினது தன்மையால் குளிரப்படார்கள் புறத்தே நீரில் அழுத்தினும் அவர் வடிவும் அழுந்தாது. Why would he talk about it if this immortal body is sitting in some heaven somewhere up there? He wouldn't be talking about this in this way. So talking about in this way. So the fact that he talks about it in this way, that it is immune to the elements, means it can function and operate on earth. But of course, the big question is, can you see it? Right? That is the big question. And I think we have grounds for thinking that it cannot be seen unless, of course, one develops something like psychic vision or something like that. It cannot be seen with the physical body because it's not a physical body. The physical bodies can only see other physical bodies. And these eyes made of impure matter cannot see something that is made of the highest form of matter, pure matter, Suddhamaya, and so forth. So I think that it's quite safe to say that although it can operate on earth, those who are stuck in their physical bodies and not developed any spiritual sense or capacity will not be able to see it. Okay? But the main point is it can operate on earth, but it is not affected by any of the forces, natural forces on it. Then Malalar goes on to really say that there is no limitation on its experience and knowledge and action. So he says, Suvar Malai Mudaliya Taregalum our Kangalai Maraipana Allah Anda Pindangalil Agampuram Mudaliya Yevadakum Mulla Vidayangalai our Kangal in the Vidate Kandaryum. Its eyes are not obstructed by walls, mountains, and other material barriers. And the body can see anything anywhere from its position. Difficult for us to understand that, but that is, again, it's not a physical body. So a physical body, it makes no sense to say that your physical eyes can see through barriers like Suvar and Malay, walls and mountains. No, it makes no sense unless somebody is just gone nuts or crazy. But that's why this is not a physical body. When he's describing it in this way, it should be very clear to us. He's not describing a physical body. He's describing a body that's far, far higher than the physical body made of impure elements and constituents. Its ears can hear anything anywhere from its position. அண்டபிண்டங்களில் எவ்விடத்திலிருந்து பேசினும் அவர் செவிகள் இருந்தவிடத்திலிருந்தே கேட்டறியும். Its tongue can taste anything anywhere from its position. And remember, these are all elaborations of the point that there is no limitation on the experience, knowledge, and action of the immortal body, and therefore those who possess that immortal body. It can touch, feel, or contact anything anywhere from its position. எவ்விடத்திருக்கின்ற பரிசங்களையும் அவர் மெய் இருந்தவிடத்திருந்தே பரிசுத்தறியும். Notice, our மெய் இருந்தவிடத்திருந்தே பரிசுத்தறியும். That is the body. He's talking about body, but it's not the physical body. The physical body, right now, obviously, your bodies and my body, your body and my body cannot feel anything that's happening in India or elsewhere, or even in the next room, right? But that's why this is not a physical body. It is an immortal body. It's Arul Vadivam, Arutegam, and therefore it has these extraordinary powers. Its nostrils can smell any fragrance anywhere from its position. எவ்விடத்திருக்கின்ற சுகந்தங்களையும் அவர் நாசி இருந்த இடத்திருந்தே முகந்தறியும். Its hands can give to anyone anywhere from its position. எவ்விடத்திருக்கின்றவர்களுக்கும் அவரது கைகள் இருந்த இடத்திலிருந்தே கொடுத்தல் கூடும். Its legs can walk anywhere from its position. எவ்விடத்திலும் அவர் கால்கள் இருந்த இடத்திலிருந்தே நடத்தல் கூடும். It can speak to anyone anywhere from its position. அவரது வாக்கு எவ்விடத்தில் இருக்கின்ற எவ்வளோடும் இருந்த இடத்திலிருந்தே பேசுதல் கூடும். And then he says all its senses of this immortal body can experience and enjoy anything anywhere from its position. மற்ற இந்திரியங்கள் இருந்த விடத்திலிருந்தே எவ்விடத்தும் ஆனந்தித்தல் கூடும். Now the important point here is this body is not some shapeless thing without any kind of structure. It has senses. He talks about indriyam, and he even talks about manam mudaliya karanangal. So it has senses, it has the instruments of knowledge, but it's a far, far superior type of body, the highest type of body, in fact, that you can conceive. And that's why its senses have all these extraordinary capacities to our present understanding. So that, and then he continues, and I already made the point that this immortal body can operate, function, and act here on earth. That's quite evident from his description. So we shouldn't think that it's sitting only in some heaven somewhere. No, it can function on earth, but its capacity is not limited to experience, knowledge, etc. on earth. It's not limited. That was part of some of the things that I just read. He also goes on to say in Jivagarnya Varukam, the second part, that it has instantaneous, unlimited knowledge. That is to say, its instruments of knowledge, he says, are not normally focused on external objects and events, but out of compassion for living beings, they can be employed, the instruments of cognition in this immortal body can be employed to understand in a moment the totality of diverse natures and attributes, including thoughts, intentions, or purposes of all beings. So, to quote Vadalar, மன முதலான கரணங்கள் எப்படிப்பட்ட விஷயங்களையும் பற்றுவனவல்ல, தயவினால் பற்றத் தொடங்கி எல்லா உயிர்களினது எல்லா சங்கற்ப விகற்பங்களையும் ஒரு நிமிடத்தில் ஒருங்கே நினைத்து விசாரித்து நிச்சயித்துக் கொள்ளும். Its faculty of intellect or intelligence is not normally focused on or directed toward external objects or events, but out of compassion for sentient beings, it can be employed to know in a moment or in a minute all worlds, all beings, all attributes, all experiences, and all meanings or significances. அவர் அறிவு ஒன்றையும் சுற்றி அறியாது, தயவினால் சுற்றி அறியத் தொடங்கில் எல்லா அண்டங்களையும் எல்லா உயிர்களையும் எல்லா பண்புகளையும் எல்லா அனுபவங்களையும் எல்லா பயன்களையும் ஒருங்கே ஒரு நிமிடத்தில் சுற்றி அறியும். Then he talks about the transcendence of the gunas. As you know, gunam, there are three gunams, rajasam or rajas in Sanskrit, activity, tamas or tamasam, inertia, and then sattvam or balance or harmony. The immortal body goes beyond these three gunas. It is not modified by these gunas. As Valala puts it, அவர்கள் நிர்குணத்தவர்கள் தாமச ராச சாத்விக முதலிய முக்குணங்களாலும் உள்ளே விகாரப்படார்கள் புறத்தே அவரது குணங்கள் கரணங்களை பற்றுவனவல்ல. Maybe a misprint. Actually, it would be better. It would make more sense if it said புறத்தே அவரது கரணங்கள் குணங்களை பற்றுவனவல்ல. That makes more sense. So in any case, the point is they are not modified or affected by these three gunas. Then he says, உள்ளே பிரகிருதியினால் மூடப்படார்கள் புறத்தே அவரது பிரகிருதி குணங்களை பற்றுவனவல்ல. That is, the interior of the body is not obscured or concealed by nature as it is right now with our physical bodies. Its exterior is not attached to or affected by any guna of nature, gunam or attribute. Then he talks about how this immortal body is not affected by time. It's not inwardly altered by time, and it's not outwardly obstructed or limited by time. உள்ளே காலத்தத்துவத்தால் வேற்றுமைப்படார்கள் புறத்தே காலத்தால் அவர்கள் திருமேனி தரைப்படாது. Then transcendence of the measures or units of nature, like weight and this and that, duration. The interior of the immortal body cannot be measured in terms of standards or units of nature, like weight, duration, etc. Its exterior is not constrained or restricted by the standards or units of nature. To quote, உள்ளே நியதி அளவால் அளக்கப்படார்கள் புறத்தே நியதியால் அவரது திருமேனி வரைப்படாது. Niyati here is used really in the sense of natural limitations. Natural measures which limit everything. You know, everything has occupies a certain portion of space, and it's limited by its mass or size and so forth, right? And time also limits the existence of things, but the immortal body is not limited by niyati or niyati alavu and so forth. Freedom from tattvam or categories of nature. It is not subject to the categories of nature and their effects. For example, the effects of time, kalam, knowing or learning, viddai, desire or ragam, and the separative ego bound by the mummalam or the three cords of egoism, matter, and karma. Purudan. Purudan is that separate ego that is subject to the mummalam. So none of these affect the immortal body. To quote, Andri kalam viddai ragam purudan முதலிய மற்ற தத்துவங்களும் தத்துவ காரியங்களும் அவர்களுக்கு இல்லை, which essentially pertains to their body, or the body is not influenced by any of these things, affected by any of these things. Then he says it goes beyond. So we saw that the pure body consists of the pure atoms and so forth, Suddha Maya, but Baladar is saying that it actually the intelligence, the persons that have attained this immortal body go even beyond the Suddha Maya. That means not even constrained by Suddha Maya. It's not affected by gross and impure matter, that is the Asutta Maya in which we live, but this body, the immortal body, goes beyond even pure and subtle matter, and it exists above this realm of pure and subtle matter as an embodiment of pure intelligence, or Sivam. Sivam is another word used for pure intelligence. So it says, Mayayal Bedapadargal, Suddha Mahamaya கடந்து அதன் மேல் அறிவுருவாக விளங்குவார்கள். That's Jnanadegam, right? Jnanadegam is the body of intelligence and wisdom that is like space. It has no appearance. So in that aspect of the immortal body, the Jnanadegam, it actually goes even beyond what is called Suttamaye or pure matter, which is a higher level of existence than our present existence in impure matter. So once again, the term Maya in Tamil refers to the gross and impure matter or stuff at the foundation of our universe. It must not be confused with the Vedantic notion of Maya, which refers to illusion or unreality. And the term Sutta Mahamaya or Suttamaya refers to pure and subtle matter far greater than our familiar gross and impure matter. And then he says, this shouldn't be any surprise by now. It doesn't have any limitations or deficiencies of the human body, right? So he's not really talking about this physical body. Again and again, I think we have to keep that in mind. It is not subjected to hunger, sleep, sex, fear, and so forth. It has no defects such as shadow, sweat, dirt, or impurity, white hair, wrinkling, aging, or decay, and death. Now, all physical bodies that we know in our experience are subjected to this. And if he says it's not subject to these things, it means it's not a physical body, like the one that we have right now, one that I'm using to talk and one that you're using to listen. ஆகாரம் நித்திரை மைதுனம் பயம் என்பவைகளால் தடைப்படார்கள் அவர்கள் தேகத்திற்கு சாயை வியர்வை அழுக்கு நரை திரை மூப்பு இறப்பு முதலிய குற்றங்கள் உண்டாவனவல்ல. And then he goes on again to emphasize that it's really immune to the effects of nature. So it's not affected by snow, cold, rain, thunder, and heat. No creatures of nature, either what we are familiar with, or the other forms that we may not be familiar with, none of them can affect or harm this body. So it's not harmed, afflicted, or obstructed by supernatural, so-called supernatural beings such as Rakadar or monstrous beings, Asura or anti-divine beings, Bhutas or elemental beings or ghosts, Pisasi or ghouls or devils, or even by Deva or Devas. It is not harmed, afflicted, or obstructed by ascetics or hermits, humans, Naragar or hell dwellers, animals, birds, reptiles, insects, and plants or trees. It cannot be slashed or cut by swords, knives, and other such instruments. So we know, from that song, Kolale, Panalale, Ariyade Valangam May Vendum Endrain Varendalithan, that song. That's basically elaborated here or repeated here. Pani, Mari, Idi, Veil, Mudalivathalam, Rakadar, Asura, Bhudam, Pisasu, Mudalivathalam, Devar, Munivar, Manidar, Naragar, Mirugam, Paravai, Urvana, Davaram, Enbavaigalalum, Yevadatum, Ekalatum, our Degam, Vadikaparad, Wall, Katimuli, Karivigalalum, Kandikaparadu, or won't be slashed or scarred by these instruments. Right? And then finally, to conclude his description of the immortal body, he says all siddhis are possessed by the body. Excuse me. It has the power of what is being called in the yoga tradition as anima. That means the ability to become so small that even the atoms appear as big as worlds. That's one of the siddhis, Ashtamaha siddhis. Although in Suddha Sanmargam we have the three types of siddhis, right? Karma siddhi, powers of action, yoga siddhi, yoga powers, and jnana siddhi, powers of knowledge, which really include a lot more than anima and mahima. But the anima of the yoga tradition, Ashtasiddhi of the yoga, one of the Ashtasiddhis or 8 siddhis of the yoga tradition, ability to become so small that even atoms appear as big as worlds, it comes naturally to this body. And it also has the occult power of mahima. Mahima is the ability to become so huge that even worlds appear as small as atoms. So anima, mahima, and all that are all child's play to this immortal body. And then he says, bringing the dead back to life, transforming the old into young, and such kinds of karma siddhis, yoga siddhis, karma siddhis, powers of action, extraordinary powers of action, yoga siddhi, extraordinary yogic powers, and jnana siddhi, extraordinary powers of knowledge, are always manifested in its presence. எல்லா அண்டங்களும் அணுக்கள் போல சிறிதாக தோற்றலும் எல்லா அணுக்களும் அண்டங்கள் போல பெரிதாக தோற்றலும் அவர் தேகத்திற்கு உரித்து. இறந்தோரை எழுப்புதல், வார்த்தைவரை வாலிபராக்கள் முதலிய கர்ம சித்திகளும் யோக சித்திகளும் ஞான சித்திகளும் அவர் சந்நிதியில் விளைவிடாது விளங்கும். Now, before I conclude with some comments on the means of attainment of this Maranamilla Perundal Siddhi Parivarvu, it's important to note that those who have attained this, and Valala does refer in the third Vinapam, I believe, to Suddha Sanmarga Jnaniga, right? There are others who have achieved this. They are not showmen. They're not like Las Vegas showmen, right? Displaying and, magicians. We have plenty of magicians here in Las Vegas that display all kinds of tricks. They're not like that. Remember, this siddhi is the highest attainment for which madhavam, great tapas or austerity, not torturing your body and all that, sitting on nails and all that kind of torture. That's not what we're talking about by tapas. Tapas has to do with giving up those kinds of desires, manase, penase, or anase, punase, and all that kind of stuff. And then curbing anavam, and so on, and cutting the attachment to body and so forth, dedicating our actions and their results to Arutharanjodi. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about. They are easier talked about or lectured about than done. As even, you just try to practice them for 1 hour, you will realize. But they're not impossible. And with Arul, all things can be attained. But that's the kind of thing that's required to attain this highest goal in Suddha Sanmargam and the highest goal of existence. And so those who have attained it, they only act as previous remarks that I quoted indicate, Dayavinal Patra Torangil. Out of compassion, if they want to do something, they can do. So their actions are always guided by compassion. But that compassion, again, is subject to Arul Niyati. Remember, in Jivagarmya Vurutta, Malla raises the question of why are people suffering? And he says that is because of Kadavul Arulakkinai, divine law. If you violate the ethic of compassion, requirements of compassion, then you will suffer. Okay? And these Suddha Sanmarga Jnanigal will not interfere with Arul Niyati, Arulakkinai. That would be inconceivable, unimaginable to them, because their consciousness, as Valalar describes, and I haven't gone into that, but that's for another time, is in union with Arutharanjodi's consciousness. It's attuned. It's always in harmony with Arutharanjodi. So that means they're not going to display tricks to impress anybody and so forth in violation of Arul Niyati. So, of course, the question will arise, what are these guys doing? You can refer to them as guys, as we say here in the United States. What are these guys doing? Where so many people suffering? Well, the suffering has already been addressed in terms of divine law. And these guys, those who attained the Maramala Perumbasiddhi Parivarvu, cannot even imagine going against the divine law. So they will allow the divine law to work itself out. That's why they don't perform. They can, but they won't. They won't perform any kind of things. Even if they are moved by compassion, they will show some way. There's always some kind of silver lining in the darkest cloud. But we have to have the jnana drishti to see it. We have to have the eyes of wisdom to see it. And often we are blind. We don't see something that they, out of their compassion, opened for us. Some way, some solution, some remedy they open, you see, even when we are suffering. But that's why it's really important to practice Suddha Sanmargam, so at least we will have some kind of intuition of what kind of solution or remedy has been shown to us when we undergo these kinds of sufferings, right? Okay, so they are not Las Vegas show people, so they're not going to perform tricks to impress anybody. Okay, let's move on to the final section of the means of attainment. So the main means is Saga Kalvi. And there are verses in the Agavo referring to Saga Kalvi. As you all know, Kalviyum Saga Kalviyum Ariya Salvam Alita Silme Silme Saga Kalvin Dharamalam Karpitega Parapoli in the Sadguruve Saga Kalvin Naramalam Unatti Saga Varatti in Tandamain Melum and so forth. He's always saying Saga Kalvi. The science and art, the learning of the science and art of overcoming death, the life, attaining the life without death, was taught to him by Arutpuranjodi. And that is the only thing we have. We have to turn towards that Arul and seek instruction in Saga Kalbi. But there are some strict qualifications. Again, Arul is not a trickster, it's not a Las Vegas magician or showman. It doesn't perform any kind of tricks, although it performs all kinds of wonderful things, but we need to have the jnana drishti or eye of wisdom to see it. It's all around us. You know, the fact that I'm talking, for instance, I wouldn't be able to do that without Arul, because there are so many complex factors, right? You know, how many millions of cells are involved in my brain, the coordination with the muscles in the mouth, the tongue, the throat, and so forth to say what I'm saying now. And by Wallalar's grace, I'm able to talk about his teachings, and by Wallalar's grace, you're able to listen and understand. That's miraculous in itself, and at the bottom of it, it is all Arutsakti, or the Supreme Compassion Force, or Grace Force of the Supreme Being. Now, the qualifications for receiving, becoming a recipient of the Supreme Grace Force have been indicated by Wallalar. And in the Samarasa Suddhasa Marga Satya Peruvinapam, he says that one of the qualifications is freedom from desires based on anavam or egoism, and attachment to matter or maya. He says basically giving up desires. Easier said than done. உலகில் கண் பொன் விஷய இச்சை பெண் விஷய இச்சை மண் விஷய இச்சை முதலிய எவ்விஷய இச்சைகளிலும் என் அறிவை ஓரணுத்துறையும் பற்றுவிக்காமல். Now, again, you know, these topics need to be explored separately, but he's talking about kind of renunciation, tyagam, of these desires. He's not talking about having them and suppressing them. That's not what he's talking about, because that will result in hypocrisy and toxic behavior, dishonesty. He's talking about tyaga, giving them up, okay? After reflecting and seeing that they don't bring about enduring happiness, and they are the source of a lot of troubles, you give them up, you detach yourself. But that doesn't mean you hate those objects. You don't hate money, you don't hate women or men, as the case may be, and you don't hate property or the goods that you need to use to keep your body in health and to move around and to have a roof over your head and all that. You don't hate any of these things, but you overcome attachment to these things, which means the test of it is when any of these things are reduced or taken away, are you suffering? If the answer is yes, then you're attached, then you've not given them up. But if you are not going to suffer when they're taken away, that means you have achieved detachment, okay? But that doesn't mean you're going to go around like some of the Siddhas did, you know, making all kinds of disparaging remarks about women and blaming them for bondage and for suffering and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to do that. If you have the company of men and women, proper company, you know, a good character and so forth, intelligent conversation, spiritual topics and all that, well, yes, you enjoy that. You're not going to respond negatively to that. Same thing with all of the other objects, material objects. This is about tyagam of the desires and detachment, not about hating anything. Remember, Suddha Sanmargam celebrates bhoga, enjoyment. Even in the Agavo, Wallala talks about it. Bhogamum kalipum porundu virgalai and so forth. It's Arut Paranjodi. Arul itself is giving us all of this bhogam or enjoyment. But the art here is not to become attached and to suffer when you're parted from these things. And if you have mastered that art, then you're on the right track, as they say. So that, and then commonality or unity perspective on all living beings. That is, in Suddha Samargam, we focus on what is common or shared by all human beings and living beings. Now, this goes against the fashion today in the West, in the Western culture, and unfortunately, India also seems to be succumbing, or at least the educated sectors, where they keep emphasizing differences. Okay, so in the United States now, it's called identity politics. So the African Americans, Black Americans, keep emphasizing their particular identity as African Americans, and that is contrasted and divided against whites and others, and so on and so forth. And every group is doing that, whether it's based on ethnic identity or religious identity, racial identity, whatever that means. So there's a lot of emphasis on differences, which is really one of the contributing factors to disharmony in the world today, emphasizing differences over commonalities. And Suddha Sanmargam, one of its unique aspects, and its very important contribution towards achieving harmony in the world, is the emphasis on common things, shared things, podu. As Valala puts it, எல்லா உயிர்களையும் பொதுமையில் நோக்கி எல்லா உயிர்களும் இன்பமடைதல் வேண்டும் என்னும் கருணை நன்முயற்சி. So the part of the ethic of compassion in Suddha Sanmargam is to focus on shared things, common things, things that can unite us, not for a bad cause, but for a good cause. After all, if you look at the human beings, ultimately they all have the same genetic code, they have the same bodily structure and so forth. And we even share our genes with other organisms. And living organisms, more or less, are subjected to the same conditions. An animal also suffers if it's deprived of food and water, suffers from disease and so on and so forth, is afraid of murder and all that. So that's one of the great things about Suddha Sanmargam. I cannot consider myself a practitioner of Suddha Sanmargam if I ever emphasize differences over what is shared or what is common. It's also, of course, tied to Armaneya Urumaipada Urumai. Urumaipada Urumai, Armaneya Urumaipada is, as Valala puts it at the end of the first Vinnapam, the highest ideal of Suddha Sanmargam. How am I going to have Anmaneya Urumaipada, or unity, soul unity, or spiritual solidarity with other beings if I keep noticing differences? Caste, this caste and that caste, and this skin color and that skin color, and so on. I mean, the world is full of diversity, but we shouldn't start building differences into big divisions, which then are naturally going to produce disharmony. Even the national cultures have become sources of division because the diversity and difference is emphasized at the expense of what is common. Now, anthropologists have pointed out common factors in all cultures, or they call them human universals. And in Suddha Sanmargam, that's very important to focus on. When you study cultures and so forth, we don't just emphasize the differences are there, but what is more important are the common factors, which have been grouped under the category of human universals by anthropologists today. So that commonality, unity perspective is very important. It's all part of the practice here. And the commonality extends, as you know, to other living beings. The sensory organs and bodies are different, but all life is one community. I am in all life is in me. Realizing this promote the well-being of all life. Thus declared Aruparanjodi. Right? These are all in the other world. And this is all part of the great means, sadhana, or you can say even yoga of Suddha Sanmargam. And then the Balalar himself says in the Vinnapam, Suddha Sanmarga Tani Neri Vandraye Patruvitu. In other words, total dedication to the unique path of Suddha Sanmarga. He does emphasize this as one of the prerequisites that he fulfilled to obtain Arul and achieve Siddhi. Okay, so this, I said total dedication to the unique path of Siddha Sanmargam. You all know this already means at the end of the first Vinnapam, this giving, I would put it as post-religious or trans-religious path of Siddha Sanmargam. Well, let me first address what makes it Tani Neri. Olalar is saying Tani Neri. He's not exaggerating. He was not given to exaggeration. What makes it unique? This Suddha Sanmargam, or the true path of wisdom and harmony? Well, its ideals, values, goals, and methods are unique. And part of the uniqueness is the post-religious or trans-religious approach, or freedom from conventional religions and their dogmas and rituals, right? As Valalar put it at the end of the first Vinnapam or petition to Aruperanjodi, இது தொடங்கிய காலத்தும் சுத்த சன்மார்க்கத்தின் முக்கிய தடைகளாகிய சமயங்கள், மதங்கள், மார்க்கங்கள் என்பவற்றின் ஆச்சார சங்கற்ப விகற்பங்களும் வருணும் ஆசிரமம் முதலிய உலகாச்சார சங்கற்ப விகற்பங்களும் எங்கள் மனதில் பற்றாத வண்ணம் அருள் செய்தல் வேண்டும். And then, of course, he says, Suddha Sanmargatin Mukhya Lakshamagiya Anmaneya Urumipaaturuமை எங்களுக்குள் எக்காலத்தும் எவ்விடத்தும் எவ்விடத்தும் உலகாமல் நிறைந்து விளங்க செய்வத்தருள் வேண்டும். That itself is tapas. That is not easy to achieve. Because you notice differences in the culture around us emphasizes the differences over the common factors, not only here, India, and so forth. What is your kulam and what is your gotram, caste, and this, that, and the other, right? And they notice your skin color and all this kind of stuff, your height and your status, social community. All of them become sources of division and difference. And the great ideal of Siddha Sanmargam, Anmaneya Urumipaaturuமை, soul unity or spiritual solidarity with other people, overcomes this, transcends this kind of focus on divisions and differences, or differences erected into divisions. And as I said, that is itself tapas enough for a lifetime. But that's two very unique features of Siddha Sanmargam. Commonality perspective in the post-religious, trans-religious approach. Then, of course, there's the ethic of life or promoting the welfare of living beings, and vegetarianism based on this ethic of promoting the welfare of living beings. Now, it's welfare of living beings, but predominantly, as Valalar makes it clear in Jivakarya, predominantly human beings. And he gives us reasons there, which you're all familiar with, why the practice of Jivakaryanam pertains not exclusively, but mostly to other human beings and alleviating hunger and murder pertaining to other human beings. So I want to emphasize this because there are people that come along and say, hey, you're wearing shoes made of leather, so get rid of that. Or I had a handbag with some leather in it, and so you're guilty of violating Jivakarya Vurkam. That's just extremism. And it doesn't make much sense, even given Valalar's. Emperor Valalar has never fanatically expressed anything like that. What he has said is you practice Jivakarya Vurkam predominantly or mostly in regards to alleviating the hunger of human beings. He's not saying check everything you have and see if you have some leather. If there's leather, throw it away. If you have wooden furniture, where did it come from, and throw it away, and so on and so forth. He doesn't get to those levels of fanaticism and irrationality. What he says is to the best of our ability and knowledge, again, to the best of our ability and knowledge, no fanaticism or extremism here. Do what you can to alleviate the hunger of human beings and try to prevent murder. I mean, help with medicines if you can, if there's a disease and they're not able to do anything about it. And then, of course, refrain from harming living beings. That doesn't mean you shouldn't protect yourself from them. He does say you can cause fear to them to protect yourself. But don't go around unnecessarily torturing them or even unnecessarily killing them, killing for sport, hunting and this kind of stuff, very cruel practices. And so there are many revolutionary aspects to Suddha Sanmargam. I mean, these values are getting more and more acknowledged today, so it may not sound all that revolutionary, but when Vallalar formulated it, certainly it was revolutionary, and it still has that revolutionary edge today. And then mukti as the means to siddhi. It's a very revolutionary approach. Liberation as only a means to adulthood, to attaining the immortal life of bliss. And then the notion of siddhi itself, not about prolonging the indefinite prolongation of the body, physical body, but attaining this immortal life of bliss based on the threefold immortal body, Suddha Degam or pure body, Pranava Degam or pure subtle body of energy, and Jnana Degam or body of intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom. That is very unique to Suddha Sanmarga. Then the emphasis on Arul or divine light of grace, compassion, as the only thing that can bring about mukti and siddhi, provided, of course, you meet the qualifications. Universal compassion as the means of worshiping the divine supreme being to attain its Arul or divine grace, which is grace force or compassion force. These are all very unique aspects. You can find some reflections here and there in other traditions, but it's not connected in the way it is in Suddha Sanmargam. So yes, I strongly believe for good reason, that Suddha Sanmargam is a Tani Neri. And of course, Vallalar said Suddha Sanmarga Tani Neri Vandreya Patruvitte. Yeah, I don't think if you become familiar with the teachings of Suddha Sanmargam, one lifetime isn't enough to practice them. There's really no room and no need to look at anything else. But of course, you can always take things that support or complement or facilitate or nurture Suddha Sanmarga. The methods of meditation, if they help in developing the things that are emphasized in Suddha Sanmargam, you use it, and so forth. And then to end in a few minutes here, the divine light of grace or compassion as the agency of mukti and siddhi. It's already there in that verse that I've quoted a few times. So to obtain this immortal body, the Arul Vadivu, we have to obtain grace or the supreme compassion. How do you obtain grace? But before we do that, we have to understand Vallar's distinction between Egadesam and Arul Puranam. Arul in Egadesam and Arul in Puranam. It's a very important distinction. I haven't seen it emphasized as much as it should, and therefore I will do my part to emphasize that. So this divine grace force or divine compassion force, the supreme energy or force behind everything that we see, in fact, it has manifested as everything that we see. There is a partial manifestation and there is the fullness of Arul. Everything we see around us is a partial manifestation of Arul. But its full manifestation is required to attain Siddhi. So, கடவுளின் இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருட்பூரணத்தை கொண்டு அடைய முடியும். It's only by the fullness of manifestation of the divine grace force that we can attain this immortal life of bliss. And naturally, the question is, what is this Arul? You're all familiar with it, but I'll just point out a couple of things here. கடவுளின் இயற்கை விளக்கமாகிய அருள் எந்த வண்ணத்தை உடையது என்று அறிய வேண்டும். சொல்லுவார் சொல்லும் வண்ணங்களும், நினைப்பார் நினைக்கும் வண்ணங்களும், அறிவார் அறியும் வண்ணங்களும், அனுபவிப்பார் அனுபவிக்கும் வண்ணங்களும் ஆகிய சர்வசக்தி வண்ணங்களும் தனது ஏகதேச வண்ணங்களாக விளக்கி விளங்குகின்ற பூரண விளக்க வண்ணத்தை உடையது என்று அறிய வேண்டும். It's a very eloquent, powerful description. Arul is that fullness of being and power of Aruparanjodi, which partially manifests and develops all things and qualities. All things and qualities are manifested as are partial manifestations of its own being and power. So everything we see is a partial manifestation of Arul. And then it is also, therefore, omnipresent. It's everywhere. So it is always at the sight of those who see and the sight of what is seen. It's at the sight of those who hear and the sight of what is heard. அந்த அருள் எவ்விடத்து விளங்குகின்றது என்று அறிய வேண்டும். நோக்குவார் நோக்குமிடம் நோக்கப்படும் கேட்பார் கேட்குமிடம் கேட்கப்படும் and so forth. It is at the sight of the knower or the experiencer and the sight of that which is known or experienced. In other words, essentially, he's saying it's all present, omnipresent. And how do we receive this? We know that already. We can say it's by the practice of compassion. But I think it is important to remind ourselves of why Valalar says that the practice of compassion is essential to receive the fullness of Arul Purnam, or a fullness of divine light of grace or compassion power. He says, as you all know, the Dayava in human beings, the compassion that we are called upon to exercise as human beings towards other living beings, mostly other human beings, but other living beings too, is actually a lesser light of the individual soul. It's a lesser inherent illumination of the individual soul. It's actually a light of the Anma that you're expressing when you practice this compassion, but it's a lesser light because the individual soul is finite. But the Arul is actually the greater light of the Supreme Being, Arupparanjodi. And so we try to obtain a greater fire by first lighting a smaller fire, right? Or obtain greater light by obtaining a smaller light. So there is not a qualitative difference between the two. It's a question of degrees. Just as if both are fires, but one is small and the other big, and use the small one to obtain the bigger one. In just the same way, we tap into this light of compassion within us. We cultivate it, develop it, remove the obstacles and obstructions to it, and that will take us to this greater light of divine compassion. It makes perfect sense. I mean, it's, I would say, perfectly logical. Once you accept the basis, the conclusion follows, right? Again, I don't see this expressed in this way in any other tradition or path. I mean, they do acknowledge the importance of compassion, but connecting compassion to the realization of the Supreme Being in this logical, simple, and logical way, I have, to my knowledge, I haven't seen it anywhere else. And I'm open to correction. But we shouldn't stop with just the practice of compassion. There's one more thing, and I'm done with that, and that is clearly explained or put by Valalar in the first Vinnapam itself. எல்லா அண்டங்களையும் எல்லா உலகங்களையும் எல்லா உயிர்களையும் எல்லா பொருட்களையும் மற்ற எல்லாவற்றையும் தோற்றுவித்தும் விளக்கம் செய்வித்தும் துரிசு நீக்குவித்தும் பக்குவம் வருவித்தும் பலன் தருவித்தும் எங்கும் பூரணராகி விளங்குகின்ற ஓர் உண்மை கடவுள் உண்டென்றும் அக்கடவுளை உண்மை என்பார் கருத்திற்கருதி வழிபாடு செய்யின் அக்கடவுள் திருவருள் நமது கருத்தின் கண் வெளிப்பட்டு விளங்கும் என்றும் அத்திருவருள் விளக்கத்தால் மரணம் பிணி மூப்பு பயம் துன்பம் முதலிய அவத்தைகள் எல்லாவற்றையும் தவிர்த்து எக்காலத்தும் எவ்விடத்தும் எவ்விதத்தும் எவ்வளவும் தடைப்படாத பேரின்ப சித்தி பெருவாழ்வை அடைதல் கூடும் என்றும் எங்கள் அறிவில் தேவரை திருவருளால் உண்மைப்பட உணர்த்தி அருளப் பெற்றோம். So we have the emphasis on Jivakaranya Workam, the practice of compassion, and the supremely logical argument as to why that is required for attaining grace. And then we also have this emphasis on கடவுளை உண்மை அன்பால் கருத்திற்கருதி வழிபாடு செய்யின், which is basically contemplation, meditation in our mind, contemplating Arupparanjodi and the attributes of its Arul in our mind with true love and devotion, not just outward show, but with true love and devotion. So what is the relation between the two? Well, Jivakarya Vartam already gives us the answer. It says using compassion as the means of worship, remember? So we have to integrate these two things. The practice of compassion must become a spiritual practice. And what do I mean by that? It must become the spiritual practice of contemplating Arutparanjodi with true love and devotion. And it's not simply ethical practice, it's not simply Armaneya Urumipadu, it is actually this Anmiga sadhana, spiritual practice, and it becomes that only if we can adopt the attitude that the person that, towards which we are practicing compassion is a partial manifestation of Arutparanjodi, and you are actually serving Arutparanjodi in that form, right? You can find this in some other traditions, Christian tradition and so forth, but not put in this way. I mean, they talk about service of God. And in some other Hindu traditions, you have this idea of serving God in other forms. Vivekananda, famously talked about serving Narayana in human forms and so forth. So something like that. So unless we practice Jiva Karunyam in that spirit, we won't be able to integrate these two essential disciplines. Practice of compassion and a kadavulai unmayanbar karuttat karidi valipaadu seiyan. The two become one. And of course, when you're not practicing compassion, you continue with the other part in your mind. But when you practice compassion, that compassion, Jiva Karunyam, becomes a way of expressing this inner contemplation or meditation. It is Arutparanjodi's partial manifestation. Every soul is a partial manifestation of Arutparanjodi. And when that soul suffers from hunger and you're doing something to alleviate it, you are actually doing something to a partial manifestation of that arut. That must be kept in mind. It's not okay. I'm a fortunate guy and I'm helping somebody unfortunate. It's not even human solidarity. Oh, that's another human being and I'm helping. It must be that is an arul in egadesam. That jivan is arul in egadesam. And that arul in egadesam, because of Maya and Vigatpajalango, the diversity and the antics of matter, distortions of matter, is undergoing hunger. And I am fortunate to have the knowledge and the ability to alleviate it in accordance with the teachings of Sudasan Margam. And this is the way this is also the way, and this is an important way of Kadavulai Unmayanbar Karuttat Karadi Valipaadu Seiva. So that's the way we integrate these two things. Some of you may recall in my earlier talks, I emphasized compassion. And then in some other talk, I think I talked about this other aspect, but they are integrated in Suddha Sanmargam. As Vallalar himself has made it very clear in Jivakanya Workam, when he says, இந்த ஆன்ம உருக்கத்தை கொண்டு கடவுள் வழிபாடு செய்தல். That is the Jivakarunya Workatin Perumai and so forth. So the two are integrated. Well, then what are you doing when you're sitting in your room? You're not feeding someone, you're not helping. What are you doing? Well, you continue with the other aspect, which is in your mind, which is that Kadavulai Unmayanbar Karuttat Karadi Valipaadu Seiva. The contemplation, meditation, Arutparanjodi continues. And it continues throughout. And when you perform actions, they're all performed without deviating from this inner contemplation and meditation. And when you perform actions of compassion, the actions of compassion become a way to express this very contemplation and meditation on Arutparanjodi. Okay? So I think that is, I don't think I'm mistaken. I think that's a very important point, which can, of course, be elaborated philosophically and so forth. But I thought I'll just put it out there for your consideration. So thank you very much. Appreciate your patience. I've just continued as inspired by Valalar, and whatever errors are there in my exposition are entirely mine, and whatever good is there is because of Valalar's inspiration. Thank you very much. And if there are any quick questions, I can take them.
Thank you, Dr. Thill Raghu. You explained the details, the divine grace and immortal body. You know, the Bodhagarya Deham, 7 forms of life. We need a physical body to experience the spirit and soul. இது தெரியவில்லை என்றால் ஆன்ம விளக்கம் அறியப்படாது என்றும், இந்த காரிய தேகம் அருள் தேகமாகப்பட்டால் இந்த ஆன்மா மற்றொரு பிறப்பு இல்லை, இதை அறிய வேண்டும் என்று பெருமானார் அழுத்தம் திருத்தமாக சொன்னதை you explain very well. Migration of soul from body to body is happening until we get the grace body. So we have to stop this migration of souls and all get immortal body is to get the grace body. Always soul seeking liberation and freedom. You told me that rebirth or reincarnation is one of the way of punishment. Rebirth is a development of soul to seek the freedom from the physical body to get the grace body, and finally we have to get the immortal body.
Yes, sir, Mr. Raja, Jairaj Raja. Yeah, I said that it's not about punishment. You know, it's not about reward and punishment. It is about the growth, spiritual growth and development of the body.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry, I understand me in a different way.
Yeah.
Soul is necessary to function the body. Through the soul, only we can change the body to grace body. Soul is necessary to purify the body from mummalam. Thank you, doctor. You explain it very well. Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jairaj. Yeah, good to hear you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. So one thing which was very interesting is you mentioned about the divine law, and you said so even so Vallalar having attained Siddhi, so he will not do anything against the divine law. So that's something interesting because so base generally we pray and we ask and we expect Vallar to give us something, right?
Yes.
But yeah, so that's not going to happen. So we
No,
have
no,
to.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it will happen if it is in accordance with divine law. And of course, as practitioners of Suddha Sanmargam or those who are aspiring to practices, we have to take everything that happens ultimately as governed by divine law. It doesn't mean that you don't try to act. You will act impelled by your nature anyway, but even that action, your own action in response to whatever is happening, everything is governed ultimately by divine law. But yes, there are no miracles if we understand by miracles something that violates divine law. And the divine law is not only the spiritual and moral law, which brings about consequences if you violate Jivakaranya Workam. It's not, as Valar says, these things happen. People suffer because they have violated Jivakaranya Workam in their previous lives. That's why they undergo terrible sufferings in this life. But other factors come into play. But the law is not only spiritual and moral in that sense, but also the natural laws that we see around us. Yerkai niyadi, you take water and use it to put out fire and so forth. These are also ultimately governed by divine law. And so if I expect, I put water on fire and I expect the water to act like oil, then I don't understand nature, right? But I also don't understand the way the divine law works. So yes, you're right. Those who have attained this Perumbasiddhi Peruvarvar, their intelligence, arivu, everything is in tune with Arupperinjodi. So they cannot even conceive of going against that law, and any opposition is bound to fail, because this divine law is supreme. So opposition, something may appear as opposition and struggle against it, but eventually it will not succeed in the very nature of divine. But yes, you're right. That's part of what I was saying. But I would just say that if something is in accord with divine law, and if it's something to your benefit, it will happen. So, remember, the divine law is not punishment. See, this is one thing we have to remember. In the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, they keep harping on punishment. And their conception of God is essentially that of a punisher most of the time. 98% of the time, or 99% of the time, that God is punishing. Okay? That's not the conception of Arupperinjodi we have here in Sudasan. The divine being does not punish. What the sufferings we undergo are the result of violating its laws. Foremost is the Jivakaranyam law, and so we have to take it in that sense. If a benefit comes to me, I take that as okay, it's a blessing in accordance with divine law. If a challenge or a trial or suffering comes, I take that also as something that comes my way because of karma and maybe some other factors, but as an opportunity for me to grow. Okay, that's very difficult when you face certain kinds of challenges, but it can be done and it should be done. And I think that is the spirit of Sudasan Marga. I remember right now, not to go on about this, but Vallalar in one of his letters talks about having prepared medicines after a lot of effort for some sick people. And then those medicines got spoiled. Okay. Now, he didn't scream and carry on about it and blame Arupperinjodi. He said, I accepted this as divine will, okay, or happening in accordance with divine law in a way that we fully don't understand. But that was the spirit he showed. So it's in that spirit, I think we have to take the adversities when they come. But to think that just because an adversity has come, it will be removed simply because I go to Vadalur or simply because I pray, that's a mistaken conception. It's also kind of childish, I would say, with due respect. But what the prayer will do is bring about eventually my knowledge or intuition of some solution to deal with that difficulty. That it will certainly do, but it won't miraculously remove it because it has occurred in the first place, governed by divine.
Thanks, Doctor. I think understood. And so Vallal Peruman's Suddha Sanmarkam is coming under the divine law, right? So if we follow that, then we are under the divine law.
Yes, that's a very
so
good point.
righteousness.
Yeah,
So if-
Jivakaryam. That's not, righteousness and so forth. Sometimes they have other connotations in other religions. So in Suddha Sanmargam, it's Jivakaryam. Yes, Jivakaryam
Yes,
is
Jivakarunyam.
divine law. Yes.
Okay.
So you're right. You're absolutely right. When you follow Jivakarunyam, you are obeying Arul Niyati. You are following Arul Niyati or divine law. Yes.
Got it. If this time, can I ask another question?
Oh, yeah. For me, fine. But
Also, if others, if you have if you have question, you go ahead. I can ask later if there's time.
Hello, Dr. Raghu. This is
yes,
Ramesh from Florida.
yes, sir.
Very nicely explained the immortal body to a great extent, its attributes in detail. You mentioned that mukti is not the end as traditionally thought. And according to the traditionalists, after liberation or mukti, there's nothing else needs to be gained. You are into the same oneness or beingness they talk about, or the universal awareness. But when we keep on talking about this Muddega Siddhi, you are still in the dual state. You are not real non-dual state. I just
Okay.
don't understand
Yeah.
that. And also,
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
and also can the universal soul or awareness can be aware of by itself without the Arun Sakti or other transformations? That is, can it be aware of awareness by itself? If that's the case, then there's no need for all these play of energies and cosmic mind and all these mayas, which I don't understand.
But the second question, I'm not very clear. Perhaps you can clarify it a little bit more. What are you asking? Are you asking, can the soul be aware without something? What is that?
It is that is, we have to be live in a body, in the mind, to know about the soul. But the soul can know itself by itself without the help of the body and the subtle bodies.
Okay. All right. So the first question has to do with you're saying non-dual state and so forth. It kind of suggests Advaita, non-dualism, everything is one and so forth. It has a lot of difficulties, logical and other difficulties. The reality of the world is accepted by Vallar in Suddhasa Margam. The soul has reality, the individual soul. The world has reality, and of course, Arutparanjodi is the supreme reality. And the world and the individual soul are partial manifestations of Arutparanjodi's Arul. It has itself brought about the world and manifested the individual soul. So they share in that reality, though they don't share in that perfect reality of Arutparanjodi. But when you talk about mukti, again, the traditional conception that you mentioned is of oblivion, basically. There is no individual life, there is no divine life there. And it's not, again, if the soul is eternal, and they all believe that the soul is eternal, right? So how can the soul just disappear then? And soul cannot disappear simply because it has attained freedom from desires and cravings and so forth, which is what mukti is all about. In the Buddhist tradition also, they run into a problem of explaining what really happens to the individual who has attained nirvana. And the Buddha only took a recourse to negative answers. It's not this, it's not that. Never gave any kind of positive answer. And I think the same problem arises for these other traditions that talk about mukti but cannot explain what happens after mukti. The individual soul is obliterated. If it is obliterated, what is the point of that? You're seeking your own obliteration. That doesn't make much sense. Whereas in Suddha Sanmargam, mukti is you're attaining to a condition of freedom from desires and bondage to material body and so forth, and that prepares you to attain siddhi, which is the immortal life of bliss. Yes, who would deny that the immortal life of bliss is worth attaining with all the attributes that Vallalar has given? You take all the attributes of the Maranamilla Peranba Siddhi Peruvarvu, which is the supreme goal in Sutta Sanmargam, and all these other things, nirvana, extinction, moksha, some kind of a disappearance to some amartha state, and so forth. They don't have the same appeal. And then I would say it's not just about appeal, but there are also internal inconsistencies. As I just pointed out, if the soul is eternal, even mukti cannot result in its destruction. And so where is the soul? It's just by itself. But all instances that we see around us are instances of Anma in a Degam, expressing itself, acting, and so forth. And that takes us to the second question. The soul can become aware of itself. So, like in the dream state, I'm not aware of my physical body, but I am aware of the contents of my mind, right, which are dreams and so forth. And even in the deep dreamless sleep state, I have some kind of self awareness. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to recollect that I had deep dreamless sleep, you know. So the
Yes.
self awareness is, yes, you're right. It is an essential attribute of the soul, but being simply self-aware would kind of be like being in a deep dreamless sleep state, or even the dream, well, in the dream state you're still acting and experiencing and so forth, right? There is not just awareness, but you are aware of yourself as flying or doing this, that, and the other. So self-awareness itself is no sign of completion. It's an essential attribute of the Anma, but that doesn't make it complete. That's why we are here in the body. You know, if the self-awareness was enough for the soul, we would all be in that state of self-awareness as souls. Why are we here in this body in the first place? So that is a very important point that Vallalar is making. He may have elaborated it in other parts of Jivakarnya Workam, but in the parts that we have, the main points about how the body is essential for the soul to develop its knowledge, which can only happen by experience and action, and that without the body, it will sink into ignorance. And therefore, it will seek another body to continue with experience, action, enjoyment, and so forth, because it has all those desires, right?
Yes.
That makes perfect sense. So I would just say you have to think about, I would suggest that you think about the incompleteness of self-awareness. Self-awareness alone is not enough for the soul. It needs knowledge, which it can get only by experience, and also action, and it also needs enjoyments. And then the point about non-dualism. We live in Suddha Sanmargam. It's not non-dual. There is a unity, Urumai, but it's not all just one. Vallalar doesn't say there is only Aruttar and Jyoti, everything else is Maya Jalam. No, he accepts the reality of the individual soul. And in Jivakarnya Workam, I'm glad you brought up this very good question. There is a very important argument that he gives. He raises the objection. What if people say that the Anma does not really experience suffering? It's only the body and the Karangal which experience suffering, and therefore Jivakarnya Workam is really not of much use. That is a Vedantic objection. And Vallalar then says, wonderfully he puts it, and persuasively, that in this body, which doesn't have consciousness in itself, and the mind and so forth are instruments of cognition, which also don't have consciousness in themselves. They're instruments. Only the soul is conscious being. It is that which says, I did this, I enjoyed this, I suffered this, and so forth. So it's only the soul which can experience, which can know, which can enjoy, and which can suffer. I think that's a brilliant refutation. And even in terms, and I have a post in my blog where I point this out, even in the Vedantic tradition, they accept that the body is jada, by which they mean it doesn't have consciousness, right? So if the body is jada and it doesn't have consciousness, it cannot have any experience. Only a consciousness can have experiences. And so who is it that says in this body, I suffered this, I enjoyed that? It can't be the body, right? And it cannot be the karangal or the instruments of mind and so forth. They're just instruments. It can only be the soul. So even in terms of some of the premises or assumptions of the Vedanta, you end up with the conclusion that it must be only the soul which is experiencing suffering, which is enjoying and so forth, which then undermines their other conclusions. that the Atman does not enjoy or suffer, and so forth. So it all becomes internally contradictory. And Vallalar's philosophy in Jivakanya Workam is so logical, so consistent by contrast, not to mention, of course, its spiritual value or appeal. So I would just say, reflect on those things. I can only say again that, I'm sure you've read Jivakanya Workam. Just go back and read those passages,
Yes.
and they will remove your doubts.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. So somebody else came on. I saw, I think, was it Miss Rama Arumugam, and then, of course, Mr. Srinivasan also. Their names came up. I don't know if they have something to say or question.
Yes. So specifically on what was discussed now between Mukti and Siddhi, I have seen some discussions talk by Salem Kuppusamy Ayya. So what he says is the difference is in Mukti, the Atma is liberated, uh, but it's not merged with Arupperum Jodi. And in Siddhi, what Vallal Peruman attained is he becomes one and he becomes merged with Arupperum Jodi, and he can do what Arupperum Jodi can do, or he becomes one with Arupperum Jodi. That's how he describes. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'll share this.
Yes, I'm aware of him, and I've talked to him a few times on the phone. But it seems to me that he's kind of, his interpretation sounds more like the traditional view of Mukti. Sri Ramakrishna Paramsa compared it to a dropping a little ball of sugar in water or salt or whatever. It just merges and dissolves in water. Okay. But Vallalar's conception of Siddhi is quite nuanced, and it has all these details that I provided in my talk. So again, I would say, go to Jivakanya Workam Irandam Pirivu, and you find quite a detailed description, an account of the Siddhi state. Siddhi is certainly attunement with Arupparanjodi, attunement. Your will is in harmony with Arupparanjodi. You have experienced Arul, its fullness, but that Arul has transformed transformed your condition and provided you with the Suddha-degam, Pranava-degam, and Jnana-degam. Now, when I say that, or when someone says that a being has obtained three bodies or threefold body, they are distinguishing it from other things. So those who have obtained this Muttiral Vadivu, the three bodies, or threefold body, are different from those that have a physical body, but they are also, I wouldn't say the difference is a kind of tricky word here. They are not one with Arupparanjodi in the sense of having lost their individuality, like the salt that you throw into water dissolves in water. Then there's no individual there. There's nobody there who has attained Siddhi. There's only Arupparanjodi. So look at the implication of saying that Siddhi means you just become one with Arupparanjodi. You merged Arupparanjodi. That means you are no longer there because Arupparanjodi is an infinite being. But that is not Vallalar's conception of Siddhi. Siddhi is divine life of an individual. So there is an individual soul that has attained Siddhi, that has those three bodies, but its will is always in harmony with Arupparanjodi. Its actions are always attuned to Arul. That's how you should take it. And that is a remarkable conception of the highest state or salvation or whatever you want to call it. In the Christian tradition, they do have something like, you are in heaven and so forth, but it's out there somewhere. Whereas the Siddhi, it's a varvu, perenba peruvarvu, and it is, as the descriptions of the immortal body show, it can experience anything, it can act anywhere, and so forth, in just the way the Arul works. So it is attuned with Arul, and Valalar himself says this, our Arivu is attuned to Kadavul Arivu. Their actions are like divine actions, but they have not lost their individuality. It's a transformed divine individuality that they have, which of course Mukti prepares them for. So I would say that to think of Siddhi as completely merging with Arupta and Jyoti is the traditional conception of Mukti all over again. That is not Valalar's conception of Siddhi. Why would he then describe the Perenba Siddhi Peruvarvu and the three bodies? Right?
Got it.
He
Got
can
it.
simply
Thanks.
say, Siddhi is becoming one with Arupta and Jyoti, and that would have been enough. So yeah, just think about it. Go back and read.
Yes, I get it. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you for your question.
Excellent explanation, Doctor. We have questions, but we can ask next session. I think it's too much time.
Okay,
now.
sorry about that if I've taken.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks a lot for your excellent explanation, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your patience.
We will ask next time. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Doctor.
Yeah, I feel that I'm sorry to have taken your time. I feel that I can keep going, although my throat is and my voice is getting a little hoarse. I feel that I can keep going for the whole of the afternoon, but I won't. Thank you. I will practice Jivakanya working here.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
No, Doctor, it was really excellent, enlightening. It was very good information.
Yes.
Yeah, but we'll continue in the next session.
Thank you again. I'm only expressing what Valalar has put in the writings that have survived. That's all I'm doing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hello, Doctor. This is Gopi. Nice to hear from you after a long time.
Yes,
Thanks
same here. Same
for
here.
excellent, discourse here. A lot of good references. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a prayer, concluding prayer by Miss Anbu or?
அன்புமா நீங்க ஜோதி பாடல் பாடி முடிச்சிடலாமா?
யா முடிச்சிடலாம் கோபி. அன்புமா பாட முடியும் இல்லைங்களா உங்களுக்கு? Yes, she's on mute. அன்புமா நீங்க மியூட்ல இருக்கீங்க. Or anyone who wants to come forward to sing the Jyoti song? அன்புமா வந்துட்டீங்களா?
இருக்கேன் பிரசன்னா, சாரி.
Okay, no problem ma.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
ஜோதி 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 சுயம், ஜோதி 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 பரம், ஜோதி 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 அருள், ஜோதி 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 சிவம், வாம ஜோதி சோம ஜோதி, வான ஜோதி ஞான ஜோதி, மாக ஜோதி யோக ஜோதி, வாத ஜோதி நாத ஜோதி, ஏம ஜோதி வியோம ஜோதி, எரு ஜோதி வீர ஜோதி, ஏக ஜோதி ஏக ஜோதி, ஏக ஜோதி ஏக ஜோதி, ஆதி நீதி வேதனே, ஆடல் நீடு பாதனே வாதிஞான போதனே வாழ்க வாழ்க நாதனே வாழ்க வாழ்க நாதனே வாழ்க வாழ்க நாதனே. திருச்சிற்றம்பலம். எல்லாம் செயல்கூடும்.
நன்றி அம்மா, அன்பு அம்மா. அடுத்த நிகழ்ச்சி நிறைவு. வாளியனை தூக்கி வைத்த கரதலங்கள் வாளியலாம் வல்ல மணிமன்றம் வாளிநடம் வலுவிச்சிருங்க.
ஜெயராஜயா கண்டினியூஸ் சொல்லுங்க.
இது திடீர்னு ஓகே. வாளியனை தூக்கி வைத்த கரதலங்கள் வாளியலாம் வல்ல மணிமன்றம் வாளிநடம் வாளி அருட்ஜோதி வாளி நடராயன் வாளி சிவஞான வழி வாளியன் ஆண்டவன் வாளி எங்கோன் அருள் வாய்மையென்றும் வாளி எம்மான் புகழ் வாளியன் நாதன் மலர்ப்பதங்கள் வாளி மெய் சுத்த சன்மார்க்க பெருநெறி மாண்புகண்டு வாளி இவையமும் வானமும் மற்றமும் வாழியவே. அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி தனிப்பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி. எல்லா உயிர்களும் இன்புற்று வாழ்க, கொல்லா விரதம் குவலயமெல்லாம் ஓங்குக, வள்ளல் மலரடி வாழ்க வாழ்க. சர்க்குருநாதா சர்க்குருநாதா சன்மார்க்க சங்கம் தலைக்க அருள் தாத்தா. திருச்சிற்றம்பலம். அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, doctor. Very good explanation.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, everyone, for your feedback as well. Thank you. Bye.
அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி, வணக்கம்.